Hello, I'm Nicholas Psaros, and welcome to this presentation which aims to build safe spaces for all to increase health and well-being by removing diet culture from movement education. Some of what we'll explore today might feel a little uncomfortable. It's completely normal. You might feel it doesn't apply to you, or you might recognise moments where you'd like to do things differently. Either way, this isn't about blame or shame. It's about awareness, growth, and creating the best possible environment for those people who trust us with their bodies. These topics are important as exercise and movement become positively pervasive in society and equally hyper-commercialised. It's our responsibility as service providers to operate ethically and not engage in predatory practices, whether unconscious or not. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet in Melbourne, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung Boinwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people here today. Our agenda for this session is that it's in 3 parts and aims to support anyone to feel safe and included in a Pilates studio. This is so that we can drive weekly activity towards optimal health. We'll discuss the nuts and bolts of these principles, broader use of exercise or movement, creation of neutral studios focused on skill acquisition, and considerations around working with people who live in larger bodies and potentially purpose-built sessions for them. Important concepts include health at every size, or HAES, and this promotes weight inclusivity, respect, and sustainable lifestyle practices, recognising that people can pursue health and improve outcomes across a wide range of body sizes. We might be familiar with body positivity, looking at neutral and non-judgmental language, focusing on strength and function, but body neutrality might be a more realistic goal for those in a studio where celebration is less important than acceptance without judgment. And in this way, we can apply cueing to clients where they can feel and achieve based on strength and control or ease of movement rather than how they look. We can normalise all bodies without a pressure to feel positive about them every day when considering body neutrality. And anti-diet culture, well, this challenges the societal systems that equate thinness with success. Instead, we're promoting sustainable behaviours, body autonomy, evidence-based and evidence-informed care to support long-term physical and psychological well-being. In a Pilates studio, this might show up as removing weight-centric goals and weight-centric language, avoiding before and after narratives, focusing on outcomes like strength, mobility, pain reduction, participation. It also means educating clients away from quick fixes, but towards consistent and individualized practice, where they can remove comparison to other practitioners in the room. And this might be useful as a tool for function, resilience, and agency, rather than body control or reduction. Considering skill acquisition, at my studio at least, we focus on control, coordination, alignment, timing, and breath. This allows our client to become more efficient and more aware and capable in their movement systems over time. Progress is opt-in, not opt-out. And progress is measured by improved execution, adaptability, and confidence, increasingly with complex tasks, and preferably related to their broader life outside of the studio. We don't aim to burn, shake, or measure progress by sweat, exhaustion, fatigue. Having jelly legs on the way out is not a sign of success in my studio. It's a sign that the instructor has completely mismanaged energy demands. This might be important beyond the idea of skill acquisition and anti-diet culture because we don't know what's happening hormonally in our clients. We're not aware as Pilates instructors of their broader metabolic profile, and it's important to consider someone's broader health rather than just fatigue as an indicator of success. I guess in my studio, we prioritize precision, but there has to be that balance where we're thinking about the limitations on motor learning and how we can transfer our workout and our work in to the deeper benefits of the method so that our client is creating a greater net benefit beyond shake your legs on exit. Although in the Pilates context we think about number of classes per week or doing exercise, for many people who are new to an exercise session or organised movement, the first step towards improving health is to reduce participation barriers. And there are new national guidelines for activity, but notice the word is not exercise. So these guidelines are developed in cohorts, young, working age, older age, chronic health conditions, pregnancy, and are in place to guide us or remind us that we need a certain dose of activity to keep our insides happy. Do you or your clients achieve this 7 days a week? I certainly don't, and I prioritise at least 2 rest days a week where I intentionally deload my activity so I can recover, and that when I am exercising or moving with purpose, I can achieve my goals based on fuel available to me through diet and nutrition and fuel expended through movement. So I've included these links here as your reference from a public health level. The language and guidance is around movement and activity primarily, notably not about an ideal weight. It's the notion that by partaking in daily movement, each citizen can achieve their version of good health. And recently, as March 2026, these guidelines have shifted from weekly to daily. I'd suggest this because many of us front or backload our week with activity or work, and then we don't end up with the protective cardiometabolic or chemical shifts from activity for a few days at a time. Many of us are now obsessed with activity trackers and Apple Watches, and our watches tell us to stand up, move around, and do these things. But on how many days a week do we get 30 minutes of truly moderate to vigorous activity? It could be 3 by design, it could be 7. It's up to you to consider this. And also, are we really getting strict muscle strengthening twice a week? Or are we looking more at endurance style training in a fitness Pilates studio? And does this actually count for strength, or does this account for moderate to vigorous activity? So it's important to understand those clinical definitions, because a Pilates class will not elicit sufficient stimulus to count for strengthening, no matter how many weights, rings, or props we use. It is likely that we do hit these mobility targets, but it's important to step back and really think about these domains and hit all these metrics where possible. While it can be an easy get for some of us and those who work in the industry, consider what it's like for those who are overweight or a class 2 obesity and live in a larger body. Walking alone and standing takes a larger metabolic cost and might leave the person with more fatigue than you or I might experience. And then what happens when we add in the lens of perimenopause, menopause, or chronic health conditions? Or what about when people aren't able to ambulate? Do people from a lower socioeconomic background than you participate in as much exercise or movement as you do? Can they afford it? Is it normalised in their culture? Maybe for men, but what about women? So there are only so many hours in a day, and caregiving, domestic tasks, and paid labour may not leave enough perceived space for these national guidelines to be met. These are just some of the barriers to participation we should consider before people step into a Pilates environment. And then as studio owners, it's our job to see if we can remove some of these barriers or offer alternate pathways to reduce barriers to increase participation. And here are some sample determinants of activity participation, because they're not just physical, they're psychological, social, and environmental. They're also identity-based, sometimes reinforced by weight stigma and fitness culture. Barriers may be similar for someone who presents as underweight versus overweight. And here's something to consider. Studios and centres and clinic-based that rely on skill acquisition, not weight-centric progression, that offer small groups, high touchpoint environments directly can target self-efficacy, safety, belonging, and competence. The ultimate output is increased activity of participation and reduction of sedentary behaviours, improving coping strategies that may be detrimental to health otherwise if not acted upon. As we go beyond the previous century of attitudes towards exercise, we now realise that thinness does not equate to good health. It's not a reliable marker of health, and assuming so oversimplifies a very complex picture. Health is influenced by a number of behaviours: physiology, mental well-being, environment, access to care, not just body size. People in smaller bodies can experience poor health, just as people in larger bodies can be strong, capable, and metabolically sound. In my studio setting, we shift the focus away from appearance and toward what truly matters: how someone moves, functions, and feels so that they can participate fully in their life. But this, of course, brings up additional lanes of conversation around ableism, race, and culture, and that's for people who are more definitely qualified to discuss rather than myself. And without invalidating the pursuit of aesthetics for some, but to create space for many, let's reframe our marketing externally as well as internal operations of the studio. It's important to recognise that most meaningful outcomes often have nothing to do with weight loss or even physical benefits. Non-physical benefits are likely what starts, then holds a transformation. So what we see time and time again is that an improvement in mood and the ability to regulate stress leaves people feeling better and able to cope better. There's also a strong social element, which many of us are aware of personally. So being in a shared space builds connection and a sense of belonging. As clients develop their skills, they might build their self-efficacy, that quiet confidence of, I can do this, which carries into other aspects of their life. Over time, this supports behavioural consistency, and movement becomes part of a sustainable routine rather than a short-term effort for a short-term win. Perhaps most importantly, this can all shape someone's identity, and people will then see themselves as capable, resilient, and active, which is far more powerful than any number on a scale. Moreover, if the touch point with an organised exercise environment, like a Pilates studio, is consistent, holistic, HAES-focused, and about skill acquisition, then these benefits are reiterated naturally within each session. It drives long-lasting change, which doesn't cost the studio a single dollar, but springboards client well-being and experience exponentially. But when we do look at physical benefits of movement, it's important to separate them from weight loss because the body adapts in many meaningful ways, regardless of size. Regular exercise, whether cardio or not, improves cardiovascular function, making the heart more efficient and supporting overall circulation. Regular exercise and movement builds muscular strength and endurance, which helps people move through daily life with greater ease and less fatigue. We see improvements in joint mobility and flexibility, keeping the body feeling more fluid and less restricted, also helping with joint swelling if that's occurring. And we see balance and coordination improving as well. This is particularly important for confidence and fall prevention as we age. On top of all of that, movement supports bone density, and this contributes to long-term skeletal health and aging. But finally, it enhances metabolic function, improving how a body regulates energy and blood glucose, and benefits that can occur without any change in weight. Here's a brainstorm of simple things we can do within our studio culture to support health at every size, but also those who aren't experienced in organised exercise environments. In a Pilates studio, we have to stay firmly within our scope of practice or lane. And our role is to teach movement, not prescribe diets or comments on food. Conversations around nutrition should only occur if appropriately qualified and within a private consult or defined paid workshop, never in a general class setting. This matters because clients and instructors are often vulnerable, and even casual or well-meaning comments about food, appearance, and activity can have a lasting impact. It's our responsibility to set a respectful tone, removing judgment and creating a space where all people can feel safe, supported, and focusing on learning about movement in their bodies, not on how they look. I've created, it's a bit rough, but an ins and outs list. So in terms of reducing barriers to exercise and creating a safe space for all, not just those who are already fit and look like they exercise regularly, let's consider our unconscious bias towards bodies and those in different size bodies. Let's consider some easy and inexpensive or free ways to establish a solid studio culture. Please pause this and take a read. It's hard to sometimes reframe how we view simple things like enthusiastic members taking selfies and how that might impact other people in the space. But essentially, in a skill-based environment, celebration shouldn't be allocated to skill. It should be allocated to skill change and education, not to attending 7 times a week or similar statements to like no pain, no gain, or didn't feel like it but did it anyway. Listening to our body and educating our clients must take priority. At the end of the day, the more diversity we have in our teaching roster, the more diversity we can see in our client roster. This means opening our studio up to more people from more walks of life. This is commercially savvy, but mainly is heart-centered and client-led. Here are some more principles we can institute to establish and protect a great culture in our studio. If you use tools like mind-body deals, ClassPass, or even just allow drop-ins, ensure that clients are briefed beforehand with plenty of time with an auto email and potentially limit the use to entry-level or generic classes. This way, our clients who have memberships and are embedded into our studio culture are psychologically safe, and we also have the chance to educate and dip in these new clients as well to how your studio runs. In a skill acquisition culture, having these defined and repeatable intake processes can look like an initial assessment, a course, a workshop, and then open classes. And this gives clients the chance to opt into progression and have repeatable data that they refer back to, rather than just coming in off mind body and sinking or swimming. Also, the collective community that we can build by having clients who've experienced a shared induction process builds trust and support in each other, and also your business and you as a studio owner. Going back to that term of body neutrality, embedding this into posters in the studio, email communications, or your social media, but ensuring clients and instructors remain from terms like summer body chat or cheat meals or fix my saggy arms. This can go a long way to ensure another client feels safe and doesn't dread attending. You know what's really wonderful is when a client doesn't have to actually think, is this place going to be safe for me? But you've created these structures which have just allowed them to relax and focus on their reason for attending. So I think a client who you can make to feel safe without ramming it down their throats will stay far longer in your business than a studio hopper who doesn't really care about you or your culture. Again, this is common sense, but also so good for business. And here are some ways to self-monitor but without mirrors. Many of us don't have a positive relationship with our reflection because of size, clothing, complexion, anything. But there are many complex reasons that probably won't be shared with us that are lurking deep and very strong. If we can move away as a culture from using mirrors as a main form of feedback in a studio and then guiding people towards skill and intrinsic feedback mechanisms to build that internal relationship with space or proprioception, I think we're in for a win. By reducing that reliance on external reflection, we can support more focused, inclusive, and effective learning, which is grounded in function and capability. And if you come back to that initial slide of the agenda, here's my skill acquisition pathway. So every studio handles this differently, and I'm not advocating for you to rip up your operations manual or sales funnels, but this is just one way we can think about supporting someone for a lifelong practice and years in your business, not weeks or months. So every studio handles this differently based on their training, their philosophy, the membership, and of course, commercial requirements. But this method sets up the studio as a business that values the craft, the client experience, and goes beyond the superficial. This will allow you to hold on to a client for decades, not weeks. So someone might come in their 20s and might have a fixed idea of how things should work and feel, but then studios technically or often will have their clients age out of their offering. This process allows someone to stay with you long term. So we give power to our clients to opt in with clear entry criteria to every level, but also an opt-in to progression. There's no pressure to physically progress. Come as you are and stay where it's comfortable. And then this will change naturally through someone's life cycle, maybe their menstrual cycle, and just how they see themselves and their identity. It's important to have variation and to talk about it and really let someone steer this, and they'll come to you when they're ready to progress. This pathway is individual to your clientele and commercial considerations. It's up to you to design. If you're working in a dynamic group reformer environment or a health club, you might not have autonomy to do this. It might be harder to shift focus even, as opposed to a semi-private studio or boutique, which has been the norm in Australia since Pilates started here in the 80s, where we would have someone in for initial consult or 2 or 5. Now we're also including Zoom or telehealth. But whether you're an allied health clinician or not, an initial consult is a very useful tool. This allows us to screen and assess mechanically, of course, and their exercise and movement history, but also as to the studio culture and how they'll fit in or how we can support them to fit in. And from a Pilates and movement perspective, are they ready for an open class? Do they have a complex injury history, or do they have a learning style which is better suited to private training and very small groups? I think some generic movement tasks within your scope of practice are very helpful, and you can tool this based on your training history and scope of practice. And you might be running a complete postural analysis or a movement analysis or collecting objective measures, or you might simply just ask someone to raise their arms above their head and sideways, and can they lift a leg up, or even simple things like, can they get down to a reformer? Can they get down and up from the floor within 10 seconds? Or are they going to need more support to enable them to do this and work within the pace of a group setting? Other things to quietly embed into this process might be around neurodivergence, learning styles, amount of stimulus in a room. You might need to disclose to someone that your studio has 4 reformers or 20 reformers, or that you burn essential oils, or that you have music on, or that the lights are fluorescent or dim or X, and building up this client profile and collaborative relationship with them can very much keep them in your business for years to come. Someone who does have additional requirements then has the space to say to you, actually, these are my requirements. How can you facilitate them? What barriers might we address together? So not exactly around this topic of the workshop, but certainly useful for all people, because they might tell you that they don't want to see a mirror, or they might want to be at the back of the room, or they might require more ventilation or closer to a fan, or so at least open this up. And then continuing this idea of skill acquisition and setting someone up for success. So most importantly, a skill acquisition approach goes beyond screening and into step A, your definition, step B, step C, etc. And yes, these are self-defined by you and the studio owner and are not about losing weight or increasing fitness per se, but could be about learning, moving, understanding principles, movement patterns, or skills. So maybe it's a lower body control focus, or push-up preparation, or building healthy wrists, or reducing headache severity. They don't have to be the way we've thought about them in the past. But in a skill acquisition environment versus a burn and firm or summer arms classes, you're also at a liberty to encourage ad hoc one-on-one training, even if 20 minutes or by Zoom at a discount. This can give clients a space to ask specific questions about alignment, performance, execution, and normalize asking questions that empower learning, adherence, and results. You'll see here again that they're going through this process to then be cleared for the next stage. Having these gateways embedded in training and classes makes it less like a martial arts or dance environment where you have exams and gradings to move on, but just this beautiful flow that allows someone to go forward and backward based on their life and life cycle. And in the previous sections of the presentation, I've discussed exercise and making a studio safe for all regardless of their size. This section is looking specifically at building a program for those who live in larger bodies, and that means someone who is overweight or very overweight or clinically obese. I use the term living in larger bodies or larger bodies, but it's important to survey and check in with your existing clients as the term that feels constructive and not loaded. Many people within the community have reclaimed the word fat, and other people feel that there's a stigma associated with it. So intention always matters and perfection is elusive. Take action first and always look for consultation around language choice from those who are your clients or customers or prospective community. And there is a range of what larger bodies is, because it could be people who are just overweight or carrying more weight than they used to people who are in the bariatric care category, or what we used to call bariatric care, or class 3 obesity. So it is important to be clear in your mission, but also to understand your plant and equipment and who you're equipped to support. Your lived experience as someone who might be fit and healthy at any size does not equate to understanding what it's like as a very large person who might not fit in your waiting room chairs or feel comfortable on your toilet seat. So it's always good to do that audit, do the deeper work, and then come up with a position that is sustainable to you. You don't have to be everything to everyone, but if you're going to charge money to someone, you want them to have a wonderful experience in your care, no matter what. If you feel like your training and scope hasn't prepared you for working with this cohort, listen to your intuition, go and take education from other organisations, and refer to specific practitioners who are educated and do support this community. In Melbourne, I look to Nadia Walton at Laneways Physiotherapy and Lymphedema Clinic in the Inner North, lanewaysrehab.com.au. It's a fantastic resource as well. And Nadia does education as well as direct clinical care for clients. So just before we get into the nuts and bolts of this approach, let's consider recent updates in terminology. Body Mass Index, or BMI, is an outdated tool. It's very blunt, doesn't take into account body proportions, race, or body composition. Most importantly, it doesn't take into consideration actual health. It was not designed to measure health and health status, just size, and sadly it's been misappropriated and misused along the way. Many medical communities are coming into the 21st century, but for some it is still the primary tool of classification, which for those in the community can be diminishing, triggering, and disrespectful. Other groups might use waist to hip circumference, or better still, consider the whole picture of endocrine and metabolic health rather than just labelling someone as obese. Metabolism is an expression of the endocrine system, and a stable, healthy weight is not achieved by calories in and calories out. It's a complicated network of hormones and reaction that deserves due deference. To learn more about metabolism and how telling someone to eat less and move more doesn't actually work in most cases and isn't sound advice and could trigger further metabolic catastrophe, please tune in to Fat Science. It's a podcast by medical specialist and metabolic medicine pioneer, Dr. Emily Cooper. Here are some updated terms from Australia and overseas. Mainly, use person-centered language, especially here with person with obesity or person living with obesity. Using person-first language emphasizes that obesity is a condition the person has, not who they are. And you can see other terms that are being used: adiposopathy, body roundness index, classes of obesity, preclinical or clinical obesity, take some time to think more about this as we start to understand, and we now understand much more about what living in a larger body is actually like physiologically, and that physiological knowledge is more important and correct and fair than a visual or an external assumption. When advertising in general or for a class specific to this community, I've given you some options to think about how we can work with integrity and how to work inclusively and how to really get someone to feel comfortable enough to come into an organised exercise environment where previously they have not felt welcome. Thinking about our language, our imagery, and how to build constructive habits for this community. Some other considerations would be about pushing the studio culture that supports all movement backgrounds and body sizes. And so here are some considerations for marketing and programming specifically for this cohort. Also, don't assume that people who live in larger bodies don't exercise or have the same lived experience as another person in the community, because there is variation in every homogenous group, and there will be people presenting to your studio who exercise 6 times a week, have a very high health and exercise literacy, and there are people who have never had the time or ability to participate in organised exercise before. And because of this, part of your intake should be understanding this history and then potentially running different levels after an induction process. So maybe those new to exercise and those who currently exercise or have familiarity in the space. And a goal is to hold the space for someone who might not feel welcome in a Pilates studio in this specific class for specific people. So by making sure your marketing and imagery supports the agenda of the actual sessions, maybe list what you'll cover in the course or session. So not just general outcomes, but specifics, and how that this purpose-built course for people living in larger bodies is helpful and not detrimental or different to previous experiences. One of the greatest things about leaving a Pilates class in my body is that I feel more connected to it. Generally, my mind is calmer and walking feels easier and lighter. So I would start and end every session with some breath work in a comfortable position, standing, seated, kneeling, supine, whatever works. And in that comfortable position, then setting some intentions, building a connection to the body, and then you build your class that supports the overall goal of connection to the self and to movement. So our goal isn't to create a weight loss class or a class that's punishing or brutal, but to provide connection and springboard further movement opportunity. Depending on what you have access to, if you're in a hall with just mats, or you're in a purpose-built studio, or you're in a reformer-only studio, you need to think of what's on hand to help people feel great and achieve those goals of entry. But there are some broader things to consider, such as your waiting area. Are the seats sufficient for someone in a larger body? Appropriate seating is inclusive and avoids alienation before they've even started. And this might be checking that your seats are weight rated and wide enough, that that your bathroom has enough space to maneuver, and again that the seats are weight rated. But also that your apparatus that you're going to use is well built and isn't flimsy. And Linz at fatbodypilates.com and on Instagram has actually put together a really helpful chart of weight limits for Pilates equipment by manufacturer. So maybe just double check. Having recently done a placement at Royal Melbourne Hospital, all their equipment has a weight rating and discloses, maximum limit 169 kilos or something like that. Now that's not the nicest thing to always see, but it is important as a practitioner that you know what's going to be safe so that your client isn't embarrassed if things were to not support them. Let's just think about each apparatus that we do have access to. So a mat, it's free, it's available, it's accessible, but also it is on the floor. So not everyone in a larger body is going to be able to get up and down or get up and down comfortably or, fast enough. So we might need extra support if we only have mats. Also, thinking about supine and prone, we may need wedges to elevate the head and chest, cushions, bolsters, yoga blocks, chairs. So ensure you're stocked up and you're able to support the people who come to see you. Supine and prone are not always comfortable or accessible because of, as Ivy from Requisite Pilates would say, boobs, bellies and butts. So just consider that as well, regardless of your apparatus. The Reformer, a pro, it's not on the floor, it's impact free and smooth movement that's supported with springs can feel fantastic. There's a rainstorm happening right now. Apologies if the sound changes. So a high variety of exercises to work with, but also the client needs to feel fit and needs to fit on the table and feel comfortable. And some reformers are much narrower than others, and even weights benches in a gym can be very narrow or broad. So there is selection when you're equipping a studio. There is that availability to consider these things if you have that luxury of equipping something from scratch. But in my experience, as someone who's lived in a larger body or is unfit due to injury, the reformer can often feel quite compressive, especially trying to articulate a spine or with end range hip flexion like strap work or footwork. So just consider the actual exercises as well as the apparatus as well. Wonder chairs are at a good height and very useful for standing and balance integration work, and of course you can add handles or poles for support. Prone can be interesting, but it can, if they're comfortable prone, you can have breast clearance off the front of the edge. And there are other options as well, including general mobility, which may give a release from gravity and a fascial release that can leave you feeling, quite frankly, fantastic or even euphoric. I certainly do after Mermaid. The Cadillac in a studio, great height to have someone get up and down with, especially in a private session. You might not have the luxury of having 10 Cadillacs. And again, brief periods of prone and supine, we can add bolsters, blocks, cushions, etc. What's great about the Cadillac or a springboard or etc. is that standing work can be done on it and around it. You can also build kneeling capacity and you have the frame to hold on to help for support to get on and off. And also you don't have the reformer carriage kind of banging and moving around. So the Cadillac or trap table does give lots of options within the Pilates method as well as other allied exercise methods. And there are generally for physiotherapy practices different clinical Cadillacs which are often much wider. These don't generally exist in a boutique reformer fitness studio, of course, but there are other options in other environments. One of my favorites, of course, is standing and using the wall. This also builds in the idea of being able to use a wall at home. It's accessible and it's a great place to introduce spinal articulation for flexion and extension, build core control, modified planks and marching like with hands on the wall, and also just take the weight off the joints and lean into it while you're educating about shoulder positioning and connection in a non-wrist weight-bearing environment. Standing free of the wall can be beneficial to teach concepts, again, like mobility and positioning. However, one of the advantages of equipment is that it deloads the joints and allows for supported range of movement. So if standing is not available, consider seated. Please accept my apologies for the lack of diversity in this illustration. It's just a line drawing with AI. There are, of course, so many body types and biomechanic variations. The point is, of course, bodies are real and bodies live and move differently. This is just a sample so you can consider one principle. And my consideration is bodies and behave very differently to what you think they're going to look like and how they might move. So in a larger body, your client might actually live with their arms draped out to the side in abduction and external rotation because of the soft tissue around their torso. Whereas in a narrower body, the humerus and lower arm might just fall straight beside. And that person might live in external shoulder rotation or internal rotation. In a larger body, the arms are generally going to be abducted to the side to incorporate the soft tissue, and they might be, again, externally rotated or internally rotated. Then add into the equation a large chest, and people might be shy or wanting to hide that, as tall people often slump. So there are lots of reasons why we can think of the shoulder mechanics and torso position being affected by being in a larger body. And it's very important in these purpose-built classes to consider breathing, expansion, because people often shrink themselves. But also to consider using props and drills to encourage, I don't want to say ideal positioning or ideal movement, but just movement in all planes and abilities. So if someone is living in an abducted position, their abductors might be overworked. So I'm talking about the arm. Shoulder abductors might be overworked. They might be externally rotated all the time. Maybe we need to build their adductors and their internal rotators in a straight arm position beside them, a little further out, a little higher up, a bent position, so a short lever versus a long lever. And we're always encouraging that idea of connection into the midline rather than peripheral things that are that cause external strain and heaviness. And that means that if you are using prone or supine or any regular position, you might need to bring the mat up to the person. So for example, in my studio, I will use cushions under the triceps because often larger people, their arms are kind of behind their plumb line. So by bringing cushions under the arms and placing balls under the hands, we're bringing the arm up into a neutral position of the plumb line relative to that frontal plane. This then puts them at a better advantage. It gives them some grounding into the apparatus. And again, you might choose to do kind of unilateral drills or exercises, or you might bring the mat up to them. But in any way, we're trying to develop and release the overwork structures and look at the broader picture. It's really important here that we go beyond our assumptions and programming based on outdated textbooks. And then, of course, in your own time, please transfer this idea to the lower body as well, paying attention to positioning of the thighs, how we work from the foot up into the leg, conditions of the knees, or position, of the knees being genu-valgum or genu-varus, and getting that articulation through the foot in non-weight bearing and then in weight bearing as well. And these are just some of the things you can add into a purpose-built class to make someone feel really good in their body rather than kind of compressed on a reformer. And when we're thinking about different positions for the body, by all means, please pause this, have a look at the handout. We want to consider which position is going to yield the best results. We spend a lot of time in regular exercise training on our back, and while this is useful, is this why your client has sought you out? So what are the goals of the class, and how do we support better health and participation? Lying supine can be really challenging due to existing posture, pain, discomfort, weight of the trunk going down. So maybe a wedge under the head and shoulders that people will use in pregnancy for cardiac care could be helpful to deload that upper body structure. So using head cushions, wedges, etc. A bolster under the knees when supine, a bolster between the legs to encourage kind of a wrapping into the midline. And similarly, prone might not be practical for all members of a class. So having options to go in and out of those positions with autonomy and over to a wall and standing for different modifications is very helpful. But I always suggest starting and ending with some breathing and down regulation, and then using a class like this to build capacity for gait and weight bearing and even falls prevention. General body control comes with all of these versus doing a regular style Pilates class, which is supine, torso flexion, hip flexion, prone, side lying, 4-point, integration, full body challenge. So going away from those models and thinking more at a functional outcome, and looking always to include breath, down regulation, and for want of a better phrase, like core concentration. So letting someone come into their body rather than going out. I mentioned this before. Don't assume that someone who is participating in this class has a low level of exercise and health literacy, because in your pre-screening, you're going to pick up that they're already at the gym 5 times a week, but they would like to understand their body a little bit more, understand how the joints work, how their spine can articulate, and how they can maybe even optimize their performance in the gym. So always providing a safe environment means looking at who's in front of you, listening to their story, and then using not using their stories, but listening and then building that into your class plan. Because the beauty of running a course or a term is that you can customize core material to the 5 or 15 or 32 participants in the room. It doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be a very stock standard thing. So if you have clients who are presenting more with wrist pain, then we're going to flesh out the shoulder, that proximal shoulder control to support a distal wrist issue. If you've got a cohort that is struggling with walking efficiency, maybe your middle couple of weeks are really going to push into gait-related hip and core control to improve that, and calf strength and release work as well. So customization is just as important here as having a studio with a great culture and that structural framework to engage. Here are some specifics though, because there are so many places in and around a studio to actively build capacity and relieve a client of their day. I don't know about you, but I always feel better after teaching. Even if I'm exhausted or want to stay at home watching the Gilmore Girls, I always feel better being in the studio and being with people. So the idea of like using movement to relieve them of their day so they can have a lovely buffer when they go home and interact with their people is what we're there for. So if prone or supine are not available, consider standing and using the wall of support. Where you can, teach movement and comfort with the apparatus that provides the right balance of resistance and support and takes away the strain of gravity. Always support the quest for that midline activation over peripheral bits and bobs. And again, using this functional approach to exercise rather than perfect Pilates. So we consider the goals raised in the last slide and in their induction sessions, and then pick apparatus and rep or variations or whatever you want to call the movements to promote axial elongation, strengthening for gait and postural endurance. And then building them into withstanding load against the spinal actions to give strength and stretch as well. An unloaded example of spinal articulation, if kneeling on 4-point is accessible, is the Kathy Grant CAT series, taking the body through various extension and flexion patterns and building upper body endurance under weight-bearing conditions. But if that's not possible, you go from 4-point to a modified kneeling, which is standing with the hands on something. And if that's not possible, we would go to just a standing on 2 legs version if that's possible. But here's a list of jibbity-jabbity of different places in the studio, including spring bars, springs, whether to use unilateral or bilateral, just different places to build capacity for your person to feel fantastic. Here are some further reading and listening to help you understand the people that will come to you for a living in larger bodies or similar class. I absolutely over the years have followed people online, and I have participated in training with Ivy Barron online at Requisite Pilates in Austin, Texas. They offer online workshops and continuing ed, plenty of advice and specific modifications or apparatus setups and ideas for people in larger bodies who like Pilates, and also just general advocacy of like what Pilates could look like if you don't live in a very lithe, dancerly body. I think learning from people online who have lived experience as well as professional experience is a great way to do it. Fat Body Pilates, her name is Linz, and she's also in the USA, and interestingly has started Expanse Activewear, purpose-built clothes for people to feel good in all sizes. Linz also runs excellent workshops to support your studio and community, and has that great weight limits list and other resources on their website. And Plus Size Pilates is a non-instructor, just a real person who loves classical Pilates and is in Detroit, Michigan. And it's really interesting hearing their experience of doing particular exercises in a classical studio on classical apparatus, and how they use the apparatus and the method to support them to live the life that they enjoy the most. So feel free to check those out: Requisite, Fat Body Pilates, and Plus Size Pilates. Of course, there are so many people who are sharing their world with us, who live within this community, and please feel free to call me in and include me in practitioners and online personalities that you enjoy too. Like I said at the very start, deconstructing and analysing our own position on any topic, sensitive or otherwise, can be very challenging. Here are some resources that have deepened my understanding without judgment over the years, and largely podcasts. As with any topic, the intersectionality of gender, race, culture, sexuality, and health is evident. So the more we learn outside of our comfort zone, the better we can show up for our clients, our families, and those in our broader lives. I've learned so much over the years unpacking my own ideas as male, as a queer person, as an ex-dancer, as someone who grew up in aesthetic athleticism and then has moved into kind of postural correction heavy Pilates, and then into someone who's found just the joy of movement and the joy of confidence in movement, and then now going into more of a clinical space but with a progressive social outlook. So feel free to have a listen, and look, some of them might work for you and some of them won't, and that's natural with learning, of course. And here are some academic references that range from industry-specific, government-related resources, as well as books and publications written by people in the community who have something to say. So I would just like to thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I think it's so important that we create safe spaces for people, and as we all work in the industry together and longer and amass our experience, I'm sure we will find other ways to support our members. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts about this very informal workshop I'm very passionate about. Have a great day. Thank you.